I have sorry, 6:02 Eastern time. So I think we should go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Tina Rivers Ryan. I'm an assistant curator at the Buffalo AKG Art Museum in Buffalo, New York, formerly the Albright Knox Art Gallery. I am so thrilled to be moderating the first of two events that we're offering this fall relating to the changing, the sort of changing topography of contemporary art, and specifically looking at digital art and sort of how that entire scene that we've been hearing about with the explosion of NFTs over the past 2 years continues to evolve, looking at it from the perspective of artists and dealers and collectors, curators, etc. So tonight we are joined by Casey Reas. And before I introduce him, I will just mention that the second event will be with Regina Harsanyi, who is a curator and a media art conservator. And that will be on October 19th at 6 p.m. Eastern. And her talk is called The Ones and Zeros of Conservation and Display, Becoming a Confident Collector of Digital Art. So please don't forget to register for that event as well and to come back and join us in October. Tonight, to get things started, as I mentioned, we are joined by Casey, who I just can't say enough wonderful things about. Officially, his bio is that he is a professor at UCLA's Design Media Arts program and a computational artist whose works are in collections including the Whitney, the Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris, and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. In 2021, he founded Feral File, an online gallery for editioned digital art. He, of course, is also renowned as the co-developer of Processing, which is a widely used programming language for creating visual art. So I like to say that Casey has sort of single-handedly, well, not single-handedly, but he often works with amazing collaborators and communities. But Casey has done so much to shape what digital art has looked like for the past 3 decades. And I've learned so much from being an interlocutor of his, and I'm just a huge fan of him as an artist. And is also somebody who really cares very deeply about the community of people who work with creative code. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Casey, who is zooming in. I'm zooming in from New Orleans right now. Casey's zooming in from California. So this is truly a sort of international event. I know many of you are zooming in from places far and wide. So thank you so much. I really look forward to this conversation. And I will say that if anybody has any questions, we will have the Q&A function of Zoom open. Feel free to drop those in, and then we will have about 15 minutes at the end to address those. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina. It's a very generous introduction. Really grateful for that. I'm going to start by sharing screen. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So this is Social Codes, Creating and Collecting Digital Art in the Time of the NFT. I really wish we were all, I'm just going to ad-lib for a second. I really wish we were all in the room together, that I could see you. We could sort of have this space together. We're on Zoom, so we have the benefit that we can interact together in this way, which would be impossible in physical space, but just longing for presence right now, rather than sort of speaking to the void. But I'm good with speaking to the void. Let's go ahead and do it. So here's the outline for the talk, the themes. So what are the possible goals within the space at the intersection of art and NFTs? Where does this fit within the larger economy of the arts communities? How did we get here? It's been a long time. What was necessary to bring us to this point? What are NFTs? There's many answers to that. Why are we even talking about them? Why are we concerned with them? What ideas do they align with? And there's also this common refrain within the so-called space that we're early, but we've tried a lot of things over the last few decades, really over the last 60 years. And in this short presentation, we'll tour some of them. So questions. If we are creating something new now, how can we make it different from what we already have? Can we make something better? My goal, my priority is to support more artists. In contrast, do we want to do more of the same, but with digital art? Digital art has never had an economy built around it like painting, sculpture, ceramics, and even newer media like video. Do we adopt the conventions of the current art world for this emerging kind of work? So this is something that I really want to do. I want to make collecting digital things better than collecting physical things. Um, right now, collecting free NFT digital things is awful. I'm not talking about artworks that might be acquired by a museum. I'm talking about general digital things, sound files, digital books, those kinds of things. Most of that digital media is controlled by tech giants, with solely their own profit in mind. We have no legal ability to give those things to others, to resell them, or even loan them to a friend. They're all kind of trapped in user license agreements. Digital media is often controlled through digital rights management, DRM, which can make it extremely limiting what you can do with these digital media files. So in general, like less friction, more rights for the collector, more rights for the artist. How can we explore new forms of art? New technologies oftentimes push the arts in different ways, photography, video, etc. What's new here? Like my question is like, what can blockchains do? How can they push art in new directions? Can we further explore networked culture? What can we do with these emerging technologies? Another goal of mine is to focus on equity and inclusion for artists and art workers. How can we imagine new kinds of social organizations and artist co-ops? How can we promote racial and social justice through these emerging technologies? How can we create a new culture, an economy around art that's not winner-take-all capitalism? Over the last 2 years, a ton of money has flowed into the digital art space through NFTs, but how are those resources distributed? These are the large questions that, of course, won't be answered in this short presentation, but they're the things that I've been chewing on for the last few years really intensely. Other questions may come up. Hopefully, we'll discover some more in the next hour. So before jumping into the digital art space, this sort of area within the larger space, I want to take a step back and look at the larger ecology of the arts. So in my view, like a healthy arts ecology is all of these things where none are really dominant. I think for me, they all exist in relationship to each other. Some intersect more than others, some collaborate and others don't. But I think these pieces are all necessary for more artists to be able to make work in the world, to survive in the world. So let's go through them one by one. First piece is public and independent schools all over the globe, all teaching art in a different way with different priorities and values. As far as I can tell, NFTs to date really have done little or nothing to change arts education as it exists at the moment. Next on the list are artist-run spaces. These are spaces that are founded by artists and have full independence from other parts of the ecology. Artist-run spaces are often short-lived, which I think can be wonderful. But I think they also are vital to individual growth and to local community. So how can artist-run spaces and those ideas sort of, what can we learn from those within this emerging new spaces? Next, museums. Museums have education programs, they're public facing, they conserve art and cultural history. They have a long view on art history and art's role. A few institutions have working groups, to think through NFTs. Some have started collecting them, or they're in process of figuring all that out. But I think in general, what's happened the last few years of NFTs have had very little impact on this piece of the ecology. Next, we have nonprofit granting orgs. These are essential in countries like the United States, where government funding is extremely limited. In my view, like some artists will never find support or not at the moment in their career within the commercial or like market-driven context. So I think grants from organizations, they can create different opportunities for artists who work in different ways. Next piece of the ecology is government-funded grants. I think sometimes they can be a bit similar to nonprofit support, but they have different constraints and they're wildly different depending on the country. Historically, digital art, the field that I work in, and I think many of you or most of you work in, have been well supported by some European governments. And I think that's been essential to the larger international scene. And I think without that kind of long-term support, I don't think we'd be where we are today, right now in September in 2022. On the commercial side of the arts ecology, we have galleries and auction houses. I think the ecology needs a sustainable market to support artists and other infrastructure. I think some artists are more suited to institutional support, and others are suited to the market. We need both to support like the widest range of artists. I think galleries specifically are often the first to show emerging artists. They can develop long-term and substantial relationships with artists. For the most part, like in the broadest way, globally, internationally, to my knowledge, galleries haven't engaged with NFTs in a really substantial way to date. I know about a number of trials, a number of experiments and explorations, but at the large scale, I think not. Auction houses are the element of the traditional arts ecosystem of everything we've talked about so far that really have these moved into this NFT space with a lot of energy. And I think in many cases, they've started to encroach on what is historically the gallery's role of launching primaries of sales, of creating exhibitions of new work, and then presenting that to the public. So here's the list again. In my view, again, a healthy arts ecology includes all of these, and none are really controlling things or dominant. I think the greatest change that we've seen is really these marketplaces, these new NFT marketplaces. And these largely emerged, in my view, because the kind of visual arts and other kinds of arts that were being presented on them weren't being supported by these traditional forms. Okay, next topic, next theme, the precondition for NFTs. 2022, a lot of people became aware of NFTs in the fall of 2020, the winter of 2021. People have been working in this space for decades, in the larger space of the digital arts, 60 years so far. So what has happened in all that time that have allowed us to get to this point? For me, the first thing is this large push, large groups of artists and curators pushing for the so-called dematerialization of the art object, 1960s up, of course before too, but a big surge then. So this idea of conceptual art, idea art, information art as a foundation for non-material forms of art. I think this is a really strong precedent for the software and material forms of art that many of us work with now. Next, we have digital mass media. So artists releasing work on digital media that can be distributed. So this is a really early project. This is Lynn Hirschman-Leesen's Lorna video disc. It never saw wide distribution as a video disc, but it's returned in the last few years in this form as an installation. The viewer sits down, uses the remote control to make the choices. And this is an early nonlinear narrative piece. Lorna is the main character. She is agoraphobic. She lives in her apartment. She gets all of her information about the world through the television. And so you can make choices about Lorna's life and what she does, and things unfold from there. I think another, for me, standout from the time of the 1990s, at this time, things were being released on floppy disks, things were being released on CD-ROM with a lot of energy. This is a still from Laurie Anderson and Sin-Chin Huang's Puppet Motel CD-ROM, which was released on Voyager. I spent quite a bit of time with this just over the summer. I think it's a really significant work that I feel is a little bit lost in time. Here is just, at this time, when things were distributed, they were packaged, they needed producers, they needed distributors. And so the barrier to entry in making a work like this was really high. Okay, and then so now we enter the time zone, or the time when I was around to like witness and experience all of this. And this was the widening access to the World Wide Web that happened in the mid-1990s. So now artists could publish and distribute their work directly to a global audience. They didn't need a publisher to burn and package discs or to ship them anywhere. They could directly reach an audience, without anybody's permission or approval. Myself as an artist at this time, you would make something, You would put it on a server, and then anybody with network access could see it. So this is a screen capture from Olia Leolina's My Boyfriend Came Back from the War, a really, in my opinion, important piece from that moment. Here's another example from that era. This is Leah's remove.org. Leah has worked with every emerging technology over the last 25 years, CD-ROM, early web, 3D printers, and now NFTs. So Leah has really been, I would say, like pioneering new forms and finding ways to bring her work into new forms over many, many years. For me, we kind of skipped some time, but the last piece here is the development of blockchains. I think blockchains are essential for NFTs. I don't think cryptocurrencies are. Cryptocurrencies certainly have a strong effect on what happens with NFTs, but blockchains, this idea of a decentralized list that is meant to be immutable. This is an image of the interface to the Bitmark blockchain, which is a registry for digital property. Okay, here's our list again. Dematerialization of the art object, digital mass media, wide access to the open internet. I didn't talk about this one, but of course it's true. Capable computers with screens in our pockets have really allowed this to move and to work. And then blockchain records. Okay, now we're on to our next topic, which is NFTs ? What are NFTs? Before I begin to navigate this, move around it in different ways, I wanted to share another take on different ways to categorize the way artists work with blockchains and digital art. So this is a tweet from Sam Spike, May 3rd, 2022. For me, it really resonated with me. So this idea, blockchain art, crypto art, NFT art, I think the moment we start to categorize things become problematic. But for me, this is a working model that is helpful to begin to separate this from that, and to find ways to merge this and that as well. So, all right, so according to Sam, my own personal crude breakdown, we have 1, blockchain art, work that uses the specific material affordances of the blockchain to reflect critically on the technology and its cultures. So the example here are Rhea Myers, Sarah Friend, Mitchell Chan. 2, crypto art, work that mythologizes the origins and ideologies of crypto culture via memes, in-jokes, and found imagery. Crypto art, I think, is really the source of NFT art. It is the source of the early sites, the early marketplaces. So here you have examples like Xcopy, Arcane. 3rd, digital art, works made and or presented using digital methods and media, encompassing pretty much everything except people selling physical works via NFTs. And Sam writes here, it's often confused with terms like crypto art, NFT art at the moment. So the examples here are Aria Harvey, Itzel Yard, and Helena Theron. And I think digital art has been long formed, decades and decades of work. It's not something new that's emerged through the blockchain, through cryptocurrency, through NFTs, but many artists who have been working in this area for a short amount of time or for generations have moved into curiosity and exploration with NFTs. Last one, for what it's worth, I don't believe that tokenization as an NFT is a necessary condition for any of the above. If you really want, it might be possible to define NFT art as a small segment of work that explores the specific kinds of distribution and investment afforded by tokenization. Okay, something completely different. This is a diagram that I wrote in my sketchbook many years ago, and it seems like it finds a way into every talk that I give. It's really important to me. And for me, what this means is that I work in software, many of you work in software, a lot of artists working in NFTs are working with software. And I think there's a tendency to think about that in isolation or to think about that as something new. For me, it's just another visual media technology, like a printing press, like an etching, like a camera, like video playback system. Like software is just another way for us to make things, to explore, to communicate, to express. And for me, that's sort of a foundation of everything. Okay, so dancing around the topic of what an NFT is it a genre? Is it a medium? Is it a distribution channel? Is it a certificate of authenticity? Technically NFT is short for non-fungible token as it relates to a blockchain, but I don't think that's how the word NFT is used in culture. I think it's used in a lot of different ways. It means many different things. So I think this is what NFT means to a lot of people. Are NFTs only short animations? Are they only glossy renders? Are they only cartoon characters? Are they GIF memes? Of course, NFTs are all those things. Do they only belong in marketplaces where buying and selling is the primary reason that they exist? The PFP, the profile pic, was the dominant form of NFTs through, I would say, mid-2022. That's where really the energy was at large in the world, not within art and NFT intersection, but within like the largest possible NFT spaces is where the energy is, inspired really by the success of the CryptoPunks. So these, what we're looking at right now, are Cool Cats, which is a PFP project, like many others, where it's a set of drawings. You have different layers, different eyes, different hair, different hats, etc., that are pieced together at random. So here, like if you look at the interface, you can see this is the angry scar trait. So we're only looking at images that have that angry scar. And this is, I think, the model of how the PFP projects work. This is an example of one of those with an angry scar on OpenSea. OpenSea is really where the majority of NFT transactions happen on the Ethereum blockchain. So we link from these gallery sites, from these portfolios to OpenSea, where oftentimes the collecting, where we exchange non-fungible tokens we exchange fungible tokens, things like Ethereum for non-fungible tokens. In the financial data, as you can see, this image is really like the dominant message of the OpenSea page and the information there. The traits, offers to buy, purchase history are all very prominent. It's sort of the primary piece of this page. So in contrast, we have this. This is the natively digital auction, which was dubbed a curated NFT sale. This was held at Sotheby's over a year ago, June 2021. It felt like a moment when it happened. It was, in my opinion, an interesting mix of artists with backgrounds in art, digital art, crypto. And I think this show, it cast a wider net than others. It brought different communities together. Different communities of artists were in proximity, and collectors were within proximity within this show. So here we see Kevin McQuaid's Quantum, which is possibly the first NFT, which was minted on his monograph. On the same page, we see Rhea Meyer's Conceptual Art Contract. We see Larva Labs, pioneers of the CryptoPunks, displaying their autoglyph project in this auction. We also have early crypto artists like Sarah Zucker and Xcopy alongside that other work. So what is an NFT? Having looked at these things, I think it represents so many different things, different kinds of art practice, different kinds of work, that it really doesn't seem to be anything for me more than like a consensus buzzword that's being used at the moment. It's so general, it doesn't seem to represent anything specific. It's not really a useful term for me at this moment. Okay, moving in a different direction. NFTs can also be a distribution channel. So the image that we're looking at right now is a set of my prints, the tissue prints, at the Bitforms Gallery in New York in 2002, 20 years ago. So it's one visual system, one piece of code, 40 images. And so each one of these images is a unique performance of the code. Each print is an artifact of my performance, the way that I perform the code, some randomness, and some different parameters. And so the way that I've chosen to work with NFTs over the last few years is really exactly this model, but at a different scale. Sort of one visual system that has an undetermined number of possibilities, and then displaying those works as a way of seeing the full, or more of an idea of the full parameter space. So this is a different version of that work, how things evolve. This is in New York in 2016. The work is always in motion in this case, no longer doing a lot of work on paper, but really focusing on the performance of the code and the motion of the code. And also through using projectors, integrating into the architecture of the gallery. Now it's more like a fresco, less of a frame drawing on the wall. When I'm working in this way, making these one-of-one software works for a gallery, I produce somewhat elaborate documentation boxes. This is a snapshot of one of those. This box and the materials that holds the source code, the compiled software. It has a set of prints that show what the software looks like when it needs to be restored. At some point, it's going to need to be restored, ported to new hardware, new operating systems in the future. So this documentation box is like the key or the guide for that, as well as a certificate of authenticity. So 1 year ago, I started making an evolution of that project. And unlike in the gallery in New York, this is a different permutation. Instead of 40, it's 1,000 unique digital editions, each one from the same piece of code, but using the random seed of the blockchain transaction as sort of the source for what happens after. So you can see how each one is different, yet fits within this like tight theme, tight system of the work. Here you can see a few more. These are ones that are more alike, just to sort of show that slice of it. And then we can, of course, read about the work, and then we can go full screen and experience it that way. And so there's these different levels. There's a way of browsing the possibilities and the precise work that became a part of that set. There's ways of getting extra information, and then there's ways of removing all of that and just experiencing the work directly. Again, this is work that's performative code. Here, I don't know, we're over Zoom and I'm just showing an image of it. Okay. And then that elaborate box that I showed before, the certificate of authenticity for the NFT is the record in the blockchain, the record of the wallet who has possession of that token. So the metal box, the CDs, the prints are no longer essential parts of the transaction. It's become more immaterial, kind of going back to the precedent and the origin of this kind of work. All right, so our NFT is a genre, medium, a distribution channel, a certificate of authenticity, something else, none. Those are some questions. All right, next theme, core ideas. Core ideas around digital art released as NFTs. First one is access. So digital media, you know, kind of after we had floppy disks and CD-ROMs and we had the web, it's been freely flowing through the internet for decades, right? So one friction in the idea of NFTs is the claim that making an NFT with a piece of digital media introduces arbitrary scarcity. And this is partially true, but at the same time, the file is still free to be copied and shared just as widely as before. The owner of the NFT gains rights, primarily the right to give the NFT to someone else or to resell it. That's like the most common right. But the work is still free to flow. It's still free to be accessed. So the media itself is widely available, and it's probably more likely that it will be preserved because someone has like a stake, has an interest in that preservation. I think that point can be debated and argued for sure. Many, myself included, have been working to clarify the rights around digital art. Been doing this with galleries for a long time, and now doing it with what's going on within this new space of working with blockchain. So FeralFile, like Tina said, is an online publisher and gallery that I co-founded. We put a major emphasis on clarifying the rights of the artists and the collectors. And these rights are presented before all transactions. So if you want to collect something, you see the rights. This is a human readable version, much like a Creative Commons license, that's backed up by a proper legal document written by lawyers that actually is bundled into the NFT, is hashed with the NFT. And so it is a part of what gets collected. Let's go through them. So first, as an artist, you own the copyright and the image rights. This means collectors cannot copy, reproduce, or make derivatives of your work, but you still can. Next, you earn a percentage of all secondary sales. This is something that a number of artists working with NFT marketplaces really fought for, really went to bat for all of us and secured. And it's still under debate. It's still fraught, but it is something that is substantial. If a collector buys your work and then sells it, you are entitled to a percentage of that sale. You will always be credited. Anytime your work is displayed or shared, it must be properly attributed to you. I mean, enforcement, of course, is something else, but having this clear for people who collect the work, I think, is an important step. Your work will be protected. Collectors can't modify, distort, or otherwise misrepresent your work when they display it. You'll know when your work changes hands. You'll basically have access to who has your work and where it is. Information about your work's provenance and subsequent sales will be recorded on a public blockchain. And that you as the artist, grant the collector certain rights to use, display, and resell your work. And then we have the collector rights as well, which are available on FeroFile, but for time, I won't go through that right now. And then last, you retain these rights in perpetuity. No matter where the future takes us, your rights as an artist are protected. So we didn't develop these rights from scratch. They're assembled together from copyright law. The most specific document that we used as a reference was the Artist's Reserved Rights Transfer and Sales Agreement, which was created by the art dealer Seth Siegelaub and the lawyer Robert Pajansky in 1971. That was the foundation for this document, and then updated to 2020 when we wrote it. Okay, the next and final topic is autonomy. For me, this is going back to the earlier discussion about the web. That was extraordinary. The idea that you didn't need permission from a gallery or an institution to publish your work, to show your work. I really personally think of early websites almost like artist books. Like you can publish it yourself and get it out into the world. But of course, it's one with global reach with network access. So this idea that artists have access to production, to getting the work out, is also a really large push within the last couple of years with NFTs. All right, so the last topic. We've been talking about a lot of ideas, in different directions. But what have people done? There's a long list of artists and developers, co-creating things, individually creating things. A few years ago, really just a few years ago, there were dozens or so experiments that we could talk about, integrating art and blockchains. They're multiplying quickly. And so I want to talk about these four just as a range, as a handful of different ideas about what we might build and what we might imagine to build in the future. The first is Left Gallery, founded by Harm Vandendorpel and Paloma Rodriguez Carrington in 2015. You can see in the lower right, if you can read that small writing, that it closed in March 2022. 2015, that's a long time ago within the framework of talking about NFTs. This is a quote from Harm about Left Gallery. So the quote is, quote, "We would sell downloadable objects in large editions for low prices. Customers could pay with crypto, PayPal, or a credit card. And then after purchase, we would manually transfer the token belonging to the purchase to those who had the interest in having them." At that time, Harm mentions, that people didn't understand what a blockchain was. People maybe wanted the downloadable, but they didn't really care about the token. I'm included. Like, I collected something from Left Gallery early. I didn't choose to receive the token. I really didn't have an understanding of that at that time of really what was going on. To understand early Left Gallery, I think we need to talk about Ascribe briefly, which is the technical platform that it was built on. 2013, so almost 10 years ago. Because Left Gallery was so early, it needed to change its technical infrastructure multiple times because the technology wasn't stable yet. So it started on Ascribe, it moved to Ethereum, it moved away from a blockchain, and then in 2021, it moved back to Ethereum. So I want to read through this. I think it's a remarkable statement for the moment it was written. In 2013, we saw an elephant in the room problem in the digital art world. Collectors did not understand how to value something ephemeral like a digital file, and it was hard for artists working with digital tools to monetize their work. Digital files have different properties than physical paintings. They can be copied easily with no loss in quality and spread on the internet in seconds. So we had been asking the question, how do you collect digitally based artworks? And then we realized, what if you could own digital art the way you own Bitcoin? So I think in 2022, that last sentence means something very different than it did in 2013. I think it was, yes. So that was a vision that Ascribe had, a vision that Harm was able to largely realize through Left Gallery. So Left Gallery had different kinds of work available, which were categorized as computer applications, video, ebooks, and PDFs. Again, I'm going to quote Harm. So, quote, "To my surprise, a renewed interest in NFTs emerged in the first quarter of 2021, which, to be honest, initially annoyed me. In my humble opinion, the works now offered as NFTs were not very interesting or just plain ugly. Why were people suddenly willing to pay so much ether for such bad art? While they often hesitated to pay for the affordable non-NFT artwork on Left Gallery." I think these are all really great points, and I'm really glad to highlight that quote here this evening, afternoon, morning, depending on where you are. Okay, Left Gallery was a strong influence on what I've been doing, and I want to share two things that I've been doing. The first one is A2P, which is something very different. I co-created A2P along with Bitmark, which is a blockchain technology company. You can see here the first version was fall 2019. And for this show, there were 4 curators: myself, Adi Waganek, Rick Silva, and Exonimo. And we each invited a large group of artists. In the end, we had 75 different artists who each uploaded a digital file. That each digital file was minted on the Bitmark blockchain as an edition of 10 plus 1 artist proof. So the site is really bare bones intentionally. But the idea here is that every artist uploads a file, an edition of 10 get made, and then we spent 1 week trading. And trading means offered. Like, Lorna, I'll trade you an edition of mine for an edition of yours. And then Lorna can say, like, okay, basically to accept or decline the offer. So it was meant to be sort of an exciting, fun, social engagement, social experience. And so we had things like, for example, the Turbo put on self-portrait with mask. That was Turbo's upload digital file. It was an image file. And then here you can see what other artists were able to collect that work through savvy trading. So you can see Molly Soda has a copy, Sabrina Rate, Petra Courtwright, Tabor Roback, myself, Theo, Morrison, Rosa. I think that's a really exciting list. And I think this idea of artists collecting each other's work in a way that's originally curated and being able to build their collection through trading with each other, that was my vision for A2P. And also I want it to be, just to be straightforward, there were no financial transactions here at all. It's completely swapping one-to-one, like every artwork treated equally and then doing that trading. And so here we have edition 7 of 10 from the Turbo. And then here you can see the provenance. You can see it started with the Turbo, it went to Amalia, then it went to me. I have no idea why it went back to the Turbo and back to me. I just don't remember. But that's what the record that the blockchain keeps. Something was going on. I don't remember what it was, but we have that as like a record of what happened. Okay. A2P was very much, like 90% of what Ferrofile is. So Ferrofile is an online gallery that I co-founded also with Bitmark. It opened in March 2021, but it was started in June 2020, like well over 2 years ago now. We started with group exhibitions. Artists would create an edition and then they would trade editions with everybody else, but everybody traded with everybody. So there's 10 artists in the show. They each receive 1 edition from the other artists. But unlike A2P, where it departed was that we created larger editions that were then open to be collected. And so the other thing about Ferrofile is that all exhibitions start with the curator. The curator defines the exhibition theme, the curator invites the artist, and ideally, when it's working well, they really encourage the artists to engage with each other and to form relationships. The curator and the artist become a group that builds the show together, that shares ideas together. For me, the idea of a group show is an opportunity to meet other artists to sort of develop new relationships. So today we launched the Harbinger show curated by Julia Kagansky, Zach Bloss, Pinar Yoldis, Ricardo Dominguez with the Particle Group, Shu Li Chang, and Sophia Crespo. Like the fact that we're able to put on shows like this, to have Julia invite the artists, work with them, write about the work, that's really the vision for Ferrofile. Okay, our earliest exhibitions are presented here. Our exhibitions open, but they never close. That was a little bit of friction at the beginning. People are used to exhibitions closing. They're always accessible through the website. Everything is file-based work that runs within the browser. And individual exhibitions are the core of Ferrofile. We support a wide range of digital media. but our focus is really code-based work, software, JavaScript, and virtual sculpture. But we're always attempting to, work with curators and artists to experiment with new ideas about what we can do within this frame of work within the browser and new exhibition formats. So this is the exhibition that opened earlier today. You can sort of browse the work. You can look at an individual work. You can read the text by the curator, basically read the tombstone there, and then you can go in and view the work full screen without any of that distraction. This is a piece from Zach Bloss. If you do choose to collect a work, I think it's important to say this work is like open, available for everybody, 24/7, anywhere in the world. If you do choose to collect a work, then you gain the collector rights that FeralFile has, but you also then have the ability to, to transfer the work to someone else or to choose to resell the work. But a really important other distinction about FeralFile is you can download what we call the collector package, which is any additional files that the artist put together. It could be additional documentation, it could be work in process. And I think a lot of the most exciting work on FeralFile is where the artist like really digs in and presents sort of like a full range of materials around the artwork that that can be downloaded for the collectors to have access to. This was Shuli Chang's The Mutants 2. All right, last one to discuss is one that's very dear to me, the Taya community, which grew out of Hicketnunk, which was its prior version. So this is a site for minting and collecting NFTs, completely unique still today, but also when it first emerged. People began to really learn about it in like March of 2021. And it also comes from Brazil. And a large community of Brazilian artists are very vibrant there. It had an amazing energy. It was completely open. Anybody can release anything there they want, like the web. It's very inexpensive. I think a lot of what was happening early with Ethereum and NFTs is it cost a few $100s to mint something or to change something. It's just not accessible for all artists. So Hicketnunk, extremely accessible, non-exclusive in a beautiful way where that's the priority, that's the idea behind the work. So there were working groups early within Hicketnunk. There were hackathons to think about developing the platform, to literally develop the platform. And they developed a set of documents like core values, core code of conduct. And I think this is something really unique about Taya, formerly Hicketnunk, that I think a lot of other projects can use as a model. Last November, Hicketnunk was shut down by its original creator, but because it was a fully Web3 project, nothing was being stored locally or centrally. All records were on the Tezos blockchain. The site was on GitHub. All the media was on IPFS, distributed file system. And so within 24 hours of the one piece of it that was vulnerable, the Web 2 piece, there were multiple clones, performing and acting as the site had before that the community had restored. It was really a shock, but it was also really extraordinary and a real demonstration of what Web3 means socially and technically. Okay, Hicketnunk was the birthplace for a wide variety of artists. Artists who had been making work for a long time, but the existing infrastructures, the existing ecologies just weren't able to support them. And this was the right place, it was the right time for them to get discovered, for collectors to find them. Early Hicketnunk was very supportive, open to new kinds of digital art and new kinds of distribution that really hadn't been there prior. So one, I think, of the strongest statements in the original Hicketnunk is you can see kind of at the top there, in the menu, you have creations and you have collections. So this is the Mimizu by Kwabibi. This is like a really strong collection, in my opinion, of work that emerged on Hicketnunk. This is Pixelful's page. And what I wanted to focus on here was not the extraordinary work that Pixelful creates, but the collection, this idea that many artists, including myself, have become strong supporters of other artists and collectors over the last 2 years through what has emerged to the NFT space. And so here the assumption is that people who are participating are artists and collectors. This really strong core value was presented here on the surface. So if we kind of scroll down on Pixelful's collection, While it loads, things load really slowly by design. They're all stored in IPFS. It's a really elegant idea. And there's one minimal way to look at your collection. If we select something, for example, Francois Gamma's work, we can look at that in isolation, just experience that work by itself. But because of the blockchain records, we can also like read more about the work. If the artist added more information, we can also sort of see all the transaction histories that are completely present and there. We can also like look at that history as well. All right. Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't the last one. The last one is art blocks. I'm going to try and like wind down relatively efficiently now. So art blocks was launched in November 2020. It's a space for software releases, so-called what people now say as generative art. Along with FX Hash, it's the most influential space for the emerging form of generative art. I mean, art blocks was the original. It was the first. This idea of putting the code on the blockchain. So that was, the vision of Eric Calderon. He carried it through, and then now there's a much larger group of people working on it. They're doing a really wonderful job around building a curatorial board. One thing really unique about art blocks that I was completely not on board at the beginning was the idea that like when you make something, or sorry, when you mint something, when you collect the work, you don't know what you're collecting. Basically, you're receiving something from the space of possibilities of the work. I've really come to embrace that and to find that to be, maybe the most extraordinary thing about art blocks. Okay, let's look at a couple things on art blocks. Two things. One, Matt Kane's Gazers. This is mint number 799. So this work has a full lunar calendar embedded in the code. I think art blocks is about generative work. It's about code that performs, code that changes over time. I think what's unique about Gazers is that based on the phases of the moon, it's different day to day, week to week, month to month. There are like unique things that happen in the lunar calendar that cause different things to happen with software. And then also, a lot of the work that's being released now, I think is a really important and essential part of software work, is that there's no resolution to it. It can be displayed on a small screen or a large screen, that it adapts to any size and any aspect ratio. The last and second art blog project I want to release is Petro National by John Gerard. This is a software simulation. The reason this one looks kind of dark and you can't see it right now is the part of the world this is representing is nighttime. And so we can't really see the image right now. If we kind of move forward and look at some of the mints, you can see what we have here, a set of simulated oil spills moving on the surface of simulated water. And each of these oil spills is in the shape of a nation, one of the nations of our world. Here you can see one a little bit better. Full screen, getting all that other stuff out of the way. I think another thing interesting about this work is that it's a collaboration with Pace. And this idea of how do NFTs intersect with existing parts of the art ecology. Here we have this collaboration between art blocks and Pace Verso. And I think it is what it is. Whether you like it or you really dislike it, it's something that's happened. I think it's something significant. So I wanted to point that out here today. Okay, in conclusion, elephants in the room, climate change. Ethereum was a energy-hungry blockchain until very recently. That was something that caused great conflict between different artists. I would say a kind of conflict and direct confrontation that in all the years I've been involved in communities, I haven't really seen it become that thought. It was really intense, and I think damaged things like moving forward for a lot of people and a lot of relationships. That's something that happened. In this space, there are many marketplaces that focus on transactions, that focus on buying and selling. There are very few thoughtful galleries or thoughtful publishers, and I hope that will grow. This extreme financialization that who is collecting the work? Do they even care about the art? Are they just interested in flipping things and sort of making more, sort of bringing more cryptocurrency coming to them? This is something that definitely happened. It existed. It still exists. It's a part of all this. This high volatility, these extreme boom and bust cycles, the rise and crash of different cryptocurrencies, the token tokens that this work is traded in. And then, quite frankly, on many reasons, a very unhealthy environment for artists. This idea of being the maker and the gallery and the publicist, it can take an extreme toll. It can be a beautiful thing to do that, but it can also just be exhausting. It can be very difficult to manage emotionally. So these are all things that existed, that are happening now, things that really make this a complicated space to be in and to explore. All right, some positives from my very subjective reality. The art is online, it's available for everyone, it can be accessed, and importantly, access and ownership are decoupled. I don't have to own the thing or have collected the thing to enjoy it, to experience it. This is very different from a lot of forms of traditional art. NFTs provide collectors confidence that they're recognized as the owner of a digital artwork. Collecting digital artwork, people have been trying it. I've been trying it for a long time. It just really hasn't worked at scale. And I think right now there's enough social consensus that the blockchain record is sort of a record of the collector of this work. It's working. Until NFTs, artists working with digital media had very few opportunities, very few options for people to collect their work. I mean, we can of course point to a dozen artists, 5 artists, a few hundreds of artists maybe that were able to make this work, but compared to other forms, the opportunities were just really slim and far between. And that's changed a lot with a lot of the, the difficult caveats talked about a moment ago, but it has changed. For software-based work, the work that my life is revolved around, generative art, sometimes it's called, NFTs are the first time, like the very first time, that there's been a vibrant market that has emerged. For better or worse, it wasn't there and it's there now, but it's something unique, and it's made a difference for generations of artists. All right, there we have it. We're at the end, we're at the conclusion. Thanks very much for joining me this afternoon, evening, morning.
Casey, I will stand in and applaud you on behalf of everyone, I'm sure, who is tuned in. I really appreciate your cogent and also incredibly dense unpacking of how we got here, what it is that NFTs have to offer, what the sort of complications are. I will say that for anyone who is following along tonight, if you're registered for this talk, you will be emailed a link to the recording of the talk. So you will get a chance to sort of go back if there's anything that you feel like you might have missed and would love to watch again. But also right now, Casey is here and with us and available to answer any questions. So if you want to drop anything into the Q&A, please do. I will say, to get things started, that I really appreciate how you sort of disambiguated a lot of terms that get conflated, I think. So, whether it's referring to Sam Spike's articulation of the difference between crypto art and blockchain art, and wait, I just blanked on what the other term is.
Digital art?
Digital art, thank you, right.
And NFT art, which didn't really get addressed directly. Yeah.
Right, and NFT art, which is something else. Just to sort of have these terms teased out, because I myself initially responded to the emergence of NFTs with a lot of skepticism, and I think that it's been really important for all of us in the contemporary art space to at least attempt to understand what's actually going on in the scene, because I think what has happened now is that there's a lot of conversation about NFTs in which people are sort of conflating things, right? So like they think they're talking about NFTs, but what they're actually talking about is crypto art, right? And so it's just really important, I think, to sort of define our terms and to speak with precision. Like if people are going to launch critiques, I think they just need to be both informed and precise, right? In terms of, what they're actually talking about. And that's been sort of one of my frustrations over the past year and a half, is seeing how quick people are now to engage in a conversation without really fully acknowledging, right, what those terms are and defining them. I do see some questions that are coming in, so I'm going to hold my own for the sake of time. I'm going to let people go ahead and have their voice here. So the first question I'll pose to you comes from username Robin Cox. Superb. Casey, are there platforms to create generative works, or are they self-authored code and art? So I'm not entirely sure exactly what the question is, but I think you might have addressed it a little bit, but maybe you want to go ahead and talk a little bit more about that, about platforms to create generative works.
I think it really depends on, yeah, this continuity. Like Tyler Hobbs this last week released a piece, I think it was called QQL, which was a really elaborate interface. The interface was so elaborate that I would argue that someone using the interface was a co-collaborator in the work. Like Tyler made the system, but Tyler was able to explore a part of the system, but people digging in were able to explore other things that I pretty much, I don't know, I need to talk to Tyler about it, but probably he hadn't discovered. Like that was a part of his work. And so I think as when you have an interface that's significantly complex, allows significant control over the software system, I really think that's a form of authorship. And so, yes, like that's an example. I think what's more common are artists who do write code, or an artist who collaborates with someone who writes code, which I think is, becoming more and more of a exciting way to work. And then the code gets uploaded to a place and then minted from there. So it's like software-based, code-based work. Places like FX Hash are completely open, kind of the ticket nunc of the generative art world on the Tezos blockchain for people to release anything that they really want to release.
And just on the topic of what Tyler Hobbs just released, I mean, is my understanding that people who mint works are themselves, out of that project, are themselves entitled to a 2% resale royalty. So they're not just sort of creatively collaborating, they're actually being financially empowered, sort of recognized as a kind of author for their contribution. So yeah, just thinking about the whole new economies that are emerging out of this. And, I appreciate that you, as an artist yourself, have really advocated for, the importance of the fact, as you said there towards the end, that, artists making software-based art, never had a market until this happened. And that's something that we, should give us pause, right, before we just dismiss this entire market out of hand. Also, I appreciated that you pointed out that, we can talk with more precision about people's motives for engaging in the market. Like, I love that you mentioned that when you were collecting things on Left Gallery, you yourself were not invested in the possession of the token, right? That for you, it was actually about collecting the art, and the token was sort of incidental. And I think that for many people, again, if you paint the NFT space with too broad of a brush, you will sort of lose nuance and lose sight of the fact that there are people who are genuinely interested in supporting artists and collecting artwork. And this idea of having the token, this fetishization of a token, that also exists, but it's not something that motivates everybody who's engaging with NFTs.
No, I feel like the two primary arguments for the evil of NFTs were the environmental consequences and the fact that it's engaged with cryptocurrencies. And NFTs don't need to be engaged with cryptocurrencies. They can be collected in many other ways. It's really the blockchain that I feel is most essential. But I think pragmatically, it was the abundance of Ethereum that really built this. And I don't know that it would have been built without it, but it could be built now and forward into the future without that. Technically, but maybe not socially.
We'll see, right? I mean, we'll see whether the NFT space will, or the emergence of this market over the past year and a half will give rise to a market that is for digital art that is much broader than cryptocurrency, right? That sort of transcends it. So we do have a couple more questions I want to try to fit in really quickly. Chris Coleman asks, are there ways you think networking has changed in this new market space between artists and curators, artists and collectors?
Definitely. I think Chris would actually be better at answering this than I would. I mean, I've still worked in galleries for 2 decades. I have an occasional short conversation with a collector at an opening. but I'm in constant dialogue with a range of different people who have been collecting my work digitally over the last couple of years. Discord and Twitter um, have really opened up new lines through this space that weren't there before. That's my own personal experience.
And I'll just,
And oh, sorry, one more thing. Collecting other artists' work, that has been the best thing, the very best thing. So having these like deeper relationships with other artists, talking about their work and supporting their work, has been enabled by this at scale.
I was just going to say anecdotally, I can confirm, I know you're only one data point, but as much as I struggled with a lot of aspects of the market as it emerged, every now and then I would have to stop and remind myself that now I'm able to go into Discord and go into the art block server and hop into the Gen Art History channel. And suddenly, it's like I wrote my doctoral dissertation looking a little bit at the first generation of computer artists in the 1960s. And now there's like a whole channel filled with people who want to have that conversation about the origins of generative art. And I'm just like, where did this come from? Like, it's kind of amazing that it's enabled this community to form and to sort of find each other. And again, the market was not necessary for any of that, but obviously just practically speaking, right, it has helped facilitate that.
Yeah,
all right, maybe I'm
completely.
going to try to squeeze in one or two more questions really quickly. So Pixelful asks, have you noticed an increase in interest in processing since NFTs, looking from the foundation's perspective? And I'm actually really interested in this because I hope that the answer is yes, but yeah, what do you think?
I don't think so. I think, we don't have numbers for processing. We have download numbers, it's in the millions. I think actively there's hundreds of thousands of people around the world who are kind of like using it and learning with it. The one thing that's changed is that you would sort of working with processing, working with P5 for most people was kind of a hobby. It was something you did for pure pleasure. There's never been a way of leveraging that into a way of supporting yourself. I mean, at scale. I think I've said at scale like 12 times today. There were certain instances of people like working for labs at Microsoft or Intel who were like prototyping with processing in P5, but to have hundreds of artists who are supporting themselves financially completely through using the P5JS software was completely unprecedented. And those artists supported the foundation too, like very generously. And so they've allowed the Processing Foundation, which has basically been struggling, deep struggle to survive for a decade. Now we're able to support the community and support the development of software. That's completely happened through the last 2 years and the support of these artists.
Yeah, it's been great looking at how foundations like Processing or organizations like Rhizome have, are so sort of important to the community that the community of artists has given back to these organizations and is really supporting them in the work that they're doing. And this just reminds me of the conversation at the beginning about a healthy arts ecology, right? And that it takes sort of a lot of different actors working together. And I really appreciate that point because I think there's some rhetoric, this idea that somehow the traditional art world is going to be swept away. Or there's some people who are saying that. There's also some people who say that that is what is being said. I think that now most of the people that I interact with in the Web3 space sort of see it as you have described it, right? That a healthy arts ecosystem is sort of big enough for everybody and that everyone has a role to play. But I think the way in which artists have sort of, stepped up really to help these organizations thrive, that has been really inspiring to watch, as well as the way that artists are supporting each other, right? So I know another one of these sort of facile critiques of the NFT space is like, oh, community, what does community really mean to them? It's a lot of talk about community, but I think if you look at, for example, what happened with Hicketnunk, you see that, right? That there is a sort of genuine community that's formed. And I think the challenge is for many people who maybe don't have not sort of grown up on the internet or don't spend a lot of time in online communities, they may not understand how a community of people distributed around the world who've never met each other in real life could be a community in any meaningful sense of the term, right? But I think the proof is there, right? That it is.
Yeah, completely endorse what you said.
Yeah. So, Johnny Polito has a question, is acknowledging that Feral is one of the few NFT platforms that he knows of to take seriously the possibility of migrating a work across different blockchains. I'm sure, John, you meant NFT across different blockchains. What is the state of the art of this capacity, and how often has it happened to your knowledge?
So the interesting thing from my point of view about Feral is that the collaboration between myself and the Bitmark company. Bitmark has been building blockchains and has a group of engineers around that forever. And my co-conspirator in all of this is Sean Moss-Poltz, who's the CEO of Bitmark. And so whenever questions like that come up, they're for Sean to answer rather than for me. But I mean, with Feral, we were founded on the Bitmark blockchain. We minted many hundreds of NFTs there. And right now we're sunsetting it. We're moving everything over to the artist's choice. Do you want to migrate these to Ethereum or to Tezos? And within our contracts, we have like a flag that all the curators can select. Like if this blockchain fails, that allows us to migrate to others as well. And so, I mean, the basic process is we burn the NFT on one chain and then we remint on the other chain, but contain the full provenance of that work in the metadata for the new mint. I think that, yeah, there's a lot of people building new infrastructure, and I don't know where any of it's going, but that's like some anecdotes about what we've done and how we've done it.
So I will use that as a segue to Regina's talk on October 19th, because Regina actually is the expert that I consult whenever I have any questions about how to wrap an NFT or how to migrate it, how to burn one, etc. So if you have any more questions, and of course, John, you know Regina quite well, but if anybody is interested in learning more about sort of the nuts and bolts of NFTs, please do join us for that. So I know that there's maybe I'm gonna take one more question, but really quickly, I just want to alert everybody that we do have a poll we'd like to share with you. So we would love to get some quick feedback about this event. If you could just go ahead and go through this poll and share with us your answers to these questions, we'd really appreciate it. So one final question that I will give to Casey while you guys are answering your poll comes from Charles Epley. And Charles points out that, you know, they have been following the blockchain space for a while as an educator and an art historian. And Charles asks, what ideas or strategies might you suggest for educators who are trying to tackle this fluid and constantly evolving topic in space? And how can we do that critically and reflexively rather than simply respond to the market and press?
Yeah, I think I need to answer that just from my own point of view as a person who teaches studio classes. What I've done with my students is we've minted things on the Tezos blockchain because the environmental concerns not there, and we've just gone. We do it, and then we talk about it. And if a student doesn't want to participate, that's fine. And we don't sell things. We just basically swap things with each other, and we just get like an experience for what it is. Kind of demystify it through doing. And I think that's maybe the Taya community is the place where I've chosen to do that for all the reasons we talked about before. And then if the student doesn't want their work there, they just burn it. The accounts are all anonymous. It's very low stake, but it gives that opportunity. And then at the same time, we do a lot of readings, mostly like a lot of Medium posts or ways things get expressed in the space. Tina's, essay and art forum, things like that provide a bigger context for what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I think it's a big challenge, as challenging as, well, I'm going to walk that back. I was going to say as challenging as teaching any topic in contemporary art that's fluid and dynamic and constantly evolving, but I actually think teaching NFTs is much harder. Not that I've tried to teach a class about NFTs yet, but because as you pointed out, it's actually many things, right? It's a technology, it's a medium, it's a social sort of group, right? I mean, there's lots of different like layers to this onion. And so it is an incredibly complex topic, but I'm very enthused that people like Charles are out there trying to teach it, because I think I have just myself have long sort of insisted that, digital art is contemporary art. and that arguably digital art is the most contemporary of all contemporary arts because it is the youngest of all of the sort of forms of contemporary art in some way. So yeah, so I think that the conversation that we're having tonight, which we hope will be enjoyed by people both in the sort of digital art community, in the NFT space, but also our larger, circle of friends and supporters at the institution, that it will help contribute to this ongoing conversation, right? Because I think, talking about a market for digital art is one conversation, but I really appreciate, Casey, you coming and sharing with us a little bit of your perspective on the history of digital art and how digital artists have been, making and sharing their art for so long, and what the future might look like for them moving forward. And I have to say, I have not heard of this idea of artist websites as being like artist books.
I made it up last year. I don't know.
I love it. I love it. I'm totally going to borrow that now with attribution. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you all for answering the questions in our poll. We really appreciate having that data. And thank you so much to you, Casey, for joining us tonight for this. And thank you to everyone out there following along on Zoom. Again, come back for part 2 with Regina Harsanyi in October. You can register for that on our website. And please, if you haven't checked out FaroFile, of course, I invite you to go to farofile.com and familiarize yourself with FaroFile. I think, again, there's a lot of critiques about what NFT marketplaces look like, but actually they are not all the same. And personally, I just really appreciate as a curator that FaroFile seems to value the contributions of curators, given that each show is actually curated and there's a space for curators to author a curatorial text and write a wall label, and that's literally built into the design of the website. So, so just, personally, thank you, Casey, for making a platform where curators have an important role to play. So again, thank you everybody so much.
Yeah.
And
thank
we'll
you, Tina.
see you next time.
Bye-bye.